And it's a full house. That's great. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. No mai, haere mai, ro, rangatira tēnā koutou. Madam Chief Justice, members of the Judiciary, President of the Law Society, and distinguished guests, including Miriam Dean QC, on behalf of the New Zealand Law Foundation. Good afternoon and welcome to the 23rd Annual New Zealand Law Foundation Ethel Benjamin Commemorative Address. My name is Karen Billinghurst and it's my pleasure to welcome you here on behalf of the Otago Women Lawyers Society. And I'm honoured to introduce our distinguished speaker, the Solicitor-General Una Jagose QC. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to former address speakers here in the room today, Chief Justice Winkelman, Justice Glazebrook, Justice France, and Professor Peart. There are some in the room today who were instrumental in establishing the Otago Women Lawyers Society in 1986. So also a very warm welcome to Judge Anna Somerville, Anita Chan QC, Judith Ablett-Kerr QC, Anne Stevens QC, Donna Buckingham, Judith Medlicott and Sally McMillan. Thank you for what you started. In 1986, the Law Society issued 36 practising certificates to women lawyers in Otago, and in 1897 there was one. Ethel Benjamin, a 22-year-old Dunedin woman who had recently finished her law degree at Otago University and came first in most of her papers. She was fortunate that the year before, the Female Law Practitioners Act had passed into law, making it possible for her to become the first woman in New Zealand to be admitted to the bar. So when Ethel started her law degree in 1893, she knew she was unable to practice law at that time, saying, "It is true that the legal profession was not then open to women and that the franchise had not yet been granted. But I had faith that a colony so liberal as our own would not long tolerate such purely artificial barriers. I therefore entered my studies with a light heart, feeling sure that I should not long be debarred from the use of any degree I might obtain." This address honours and preserves Ethel Benjamin's pioneering spirit. Its purpose is to encourage education and achievement in women today and to stimulate debate about social justice and gender. So from one in-house lawyer to another, it is my pleasure, Una, to introduce you, New Zealand's first woman Solicitor-General, to give the address today. And I'll keep talking. You are an experienced, successful public servant, having worked at 4 different agencies, starting with the Ministry of Consumer Affairs. Then you were Chief Legal Advisor at Ministry of Fisheries, Crown Counsel and Deputy Solicitor-General at Crown Law. In 2015, you took up a unique opportunity to be Acting Director of the Government Communications Security Bureau. 3 years ago, you were appointed Solicitor-General and Chief Executive of Crown Law, and then later in 2016, you were appointed a Queen's Counsel. And like Ethel, you are an Otago University graduate. Your success in law would seem to confirm your mother's initial reservations on archaeology as your first career choice, saying, "Una, you get an asthma attack just making your bed." We're very lucky that you took that advice and that you're here in Dunedin today. Kia koe te rākau.
Before I start, can I just say there's a seat here and there's 2 here. Always seats in the front row. Ina mana, ina reo, e rau rangatira mā, tēnā koutou katoa. Ina mate, haere, haere, haere atu rā. Ina iwi I hui hui nei, tēnā koutou. Ina kai whakawā, o ngā koti kotua o te motu, tēnā koutou. Ko te whānau, Jenny, Lucy, Sam, Mia, kia ora, thanks for coming. Ko au roia mā tāmua o te Corona, ko Una Jagose toko ingoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks very much to everybody for coming. Thank you very much to Karen for the introduction and for both to Karen and Lizzie for welcoming me, for inviting me, for with some subterfuge that I still haven't gotten to the bottom of, meaning that I arrived at my friend Lynn's house in Mornington to a gift pack from Owls, full of, you won't be surprised to know, owl-related paraphernalia. Very nice touch, thank you. It's always lovely to be back here in Dunedin, where I studied law in the 1980s. I'm only slightly daunted to be giving this address by looking back at the list of previous speakers, and I think possibly even more daunted now by seeing some of you in the audience and seeing this audience today. But in any event, I came here to Dunedin to study law fresh from high school. I was pretty sure I didn't want to be a lawyer, but I didn't really understand that I was taking for granted something that Ethel Benjamin had to fight for. So I'm really grateful to Ethel, to many other women since, again, many of whom are in this room, who have continued in her path, who have continued to work through the years feeling, if I can borrow a phrase from Dame Shana Lice when she gave this address, feeling the chill that buffeted Ethel. That chill continues to buffet. The fight still goes on some 120 years since Ethel first faced that chill southerly right here in Ōtepoti in our profession. We know, of course, that Ethel Benjamin was the first woman admitted to the bar to practice law in Aotearoa in the late 1890s. In her own words, she was the first lady south of the line. An early pioneer, we see her familiar portrait often. She's held up as a champion of women's rights and for social equality. She had a vision more than a century ago that women are equal to men and able to develop in the legal profession to equal status. And as we just heard from Karen, she needed not just her own grit and determination, but also legislative reform to practice as a lawyer. So I thought, 122 years on, let's muse on what Ethel would say if she could see us now. She knew it wouldn't be easy continuing her fight for equality, as she said rather prophetically in an interview with the Evening Star here in Dunedin. For many years, the fight against prejudice will be hard and severe, and the woman lawyer must show herself more than ordinarily gifted before her abilities will be recognised. For her own sake, and for the sake of all women who will follow in her footsteps, she must acquit herself well. And even though in 1897 she had already identified, even then, that the legal profession was somewhat overcrowded, she would be interested to know that as of July this year, just over half of lawyers practising in Aotearoa are women. With these numbers, we know that Ethel's wish has certainly been met when she said, "Women should be able to consult members of their own sex regarding the many delicate questions on which they daily have to be advised." Well, today women can brief and seek advice from lawyers who are women in every town and city across the country, in all ranges of work types, and not just on delicate questions. And I venture she would have been delighted to know that it only took 92 years since she was the first that women started graduating from our law schools in equal or greater number than men. That first happened in 1989. Sooner or later, said Ethel, success would crown efforts of women determined to succeed. Women who are, as she said, diligent and pushing, who, as she said again, make the most of every opportunity, would succeed. So on a numbers basis, women have achieved gender equality in our profession. We're entering the profession in equal or greater numbers than men, and since 2018, more women than men hold practising certificates. I have to say we can't say the same for Māori lawyers. Just a few months before Ethel graduated and was admitted to practice, we had another first. Apirana Turupa Ngata, later Sir Apirana Ngata, was the first Māori lawyer to be admitted to practice law. Despite that, the first admission of wahine Māori wasn't until 1972, Dame Georgina Tahuhu. Leaping forward, though, to today, unlike women generally, Māori and Pacifica students haven't achieved parity in numbers coming through law schools. The proportion of Māori and Pacifica law students doesn't reflect the national population. Those proportions drop again at graduation, they drop again in completing professionals courses and in entering the profession. In terms of practising lawyers, 85% of lawyers identify as European, and that's against a working age population of 74%. But if I compare the same things, only 6.1% of Māori identify, 6.1% of lawyers are Māori as compared to the national working age population of 12%. But if I return for now my focus to women, I do acknowledge that there's been a lot of progress and there's a lot to be proud of. There are a lot of firsts, and they keep coming. To mention just some, in our constitutional roles, the first woman Chief Justice, the Right Honourable Dame Sian Elias, and now the second, Tēnā koe Justice Wing Kelman, wherever you are, I know you're here somewhere. The first woman Attorney General, Margaret Wilson, and not one but 3 Prime Ministers and Governors General. A small anecdote, if I may, about the role of the Solicitor-General, which, as Karen said, I'm the first woman to hold this role. In 2000, the office of the Solicitor-General was vacant following Sir John McGrath's appointment to the bench. The Prime Minister was Helen Clark, the Attorney-General Margaret Wilson. The Governor-General who appoints the Solicitor-General had just been announced, Sylvia Cartwright. Against that, the September 8 announcement of Terence Arnold as the next Solicitor-General was headlined in the newspaper, "It's a boy." So we hail these apparently glass ceiling moments for women with a lot of jubilation. You know, those women who first graduated in 1989 in greater numbers than men, I was one of those graduating women, are now in their 50s, potentially peak career time. And if equality of numbers was the answer, we should now be seeing equal numbers of women lawyers in our senior roles. For example, amongst the ranks of QCs, partners and directors, and judges. And yet women remain materially underrepresented at all senior levels in our profession, across public and private sector legal workplaces, and with Māori, Pacific and other ethnic minority women even further underrepresented. I recognise my own privilege here, of course, being one of those graduating women, and I do take the responsibility that I have to have a voice and to make it be heard. So again, thank you for being here. You're getting some of that today. So in the profession, only 21% of our senior ranks, Queen's Counsel, are women, and just over 30% of partners and directors in multi-partner firms are women. While the Supreme Court has 3 women judges out of 6, the Court of Appeal has 1 of 10, the High Court better, but still only... Oh, I beg your pardon. All right. Well, I might be corrected again here. The High Court is better at 17 out of 40. And ethnic diversity in these senior ranks and on the senior courts is woeful. So what is going on? It's quite evident that we have all the things in place that we have always said and we've always been told are the precursors to gender equality. We've got the supply pipeline, we've certainly got the role models, and we most certainly have got the determination. But the results in equity of outcome and shared seats in institutional power roles shows us that those precursors were not enough. So again, I say, what on earth is going on? I think the answer lies in something much deeper and much harder. It lies in the culture of our legal profession. And I'm confident that this is so because the promise of equality, the oft-stated commitment to diversity, the burgeoning pipeline of women in our profession has not delivered meaningful inclusion or equity of outcome for most women. And many of you will know that we have been on a public and painful journey as a profession over the last couple of years. What is now out in the open and evident to all is that bullying, sexual misconduct and harassment, assault, discrimination and a culture of exploiting junior staff are significant problems for our profession. Many of you will remember when news broke last year of 5 young women's horrific experiences of sexual misconduct and harassment in a law firm. And it became clear this was not an isolated incident, and the widespread nature of the same issues was soon revealed through Zoe Lawton's blog, through our Me Too experiences and media, through media outlets, giving brave women a voice to tell their stories. And there also have been surveys of the profession. Dame Sylvia Cartwright, by the way, the first woman Chief District Court Judge and the first woman to be appointed to the High Court, she chaired the New Zealand Law Society's working group, which published its report last year, proposing regulatory change to address sexual violence and harassment, bullying and discrimination in the profession. And she begins the report this way. 2018 is a watershed moment in the culture of the New Zealand legal profession. The experiences of 5 young women and media reports drawing on the Me Too movement expose sexual violence and harassment in the legal profession. The outpouring of shared experiences that followed confirm that unacceptable behaviour in the form of sexual violence, harassment, discrimination and bullying is part of the fabric of the legal profession. This conduct has remained unchecked in the profession for far too long. The elimination of this type of behaviour is imperative for the reputation of the profession and to secure its future. The legal community must be a safe place for all. In 2018, the New Zealand Law Society had commissioned Colmar Brunton to assess the legal workplace environment. The objective of the survey was to provide a measure of legal workplace well-being and to establish the prevalence and characteristics of sexual harassment and bullying in legal workplaces. Now, the results are publicly available, and I'm not going to detail it all here. Some overall findings, though: just over 30% of women and 5% of men report having been sexually harassed in their work. The groups that report the lowest levels of job satisfaction are women, lawyers under 30, lawyers in law firms, and employed barristers. Complaints were not being made because of fear of missing out on promotion, fear nothing would change, fear harassment would become worse, and not being able to find a confidential or trusted complaint service. Some in our profession said they were surprised. Most women were not surprised. Most women have known for too long that sexual misconduct, unwanted sexual attention or comment, offensive or crude behaviour based on gender or sex characteristics, and bullying have all been features of practising law in New Zealand. But I want to draw out 3 particular points from that survey. The last comparable survey of sexual misconduct and harassment in the profession was undertaken in 1992. It's referenced in Jill Gatfield and Alison Gray's book, Women Lawyers in New Zealand, a survey of the legal profession. The levels of harassment and misconduct then were similar to the levels being reported in the recent study. So for nearly 3 decades we have known about, but have not shifted this blot on our profession. Second point I want to emphasise is that the survey, the New Zealand Law Society survey, didn't survey administrative professionals, that is, those women, usually, who also work in legal workplaces in secretarial or other support roles. Given that abuse of power is at the heart of misconduct and harassment, and that administrative professionals who support lawyers are low in the legal workforce hierarchy, I think this is a significant omission. The real results, once all women who work in legal workplaces are considered, are likely to be worse than what is published. Third, the survey made a distinction between behavioural and legal definitions of sexual harassment and reported on these separately. Behavioural harassment was defined as one or more behaviours that fall into broad categories of unwanted sexual attention or crude and offensive behaviour, for example, unwelcome touching or inappropriate and repeated invitations to go on a date, whereas legal sexual harassment definition required either repeated incidents or to a higher threshold of misconduct. I accept there are differences between those types of behaviour, but actually I urge the use of the behavioural data because to do otherwise risks underreporting on the serious cultural problem. When we use that data, we see a much more sobering modern picture. Using the behavioural definition and considering just the last 5 years, the 17% of women lawyers who have experienced legal sexual harassment rises to 40% of women. We shouldn't take any comfort from being able to come to a different and better sounding result through legal interpretation and semantics. So I say we should use the behavioural definition. That data from the survey was mined further with a particular lens on Māori lawyers, showing that the 5-year prevalence figure for sexual harassment of Māori lawyers is higher than the average. 40% of Māori lawyers of all genders have been sexually harassed in the last 5 years, compared with 27, with the average of 27%. 29% of Māori men report harassment compared with 14 of all male lawyers. 46% of Māori women as compared to 40% of all women. Is it any wonder that women struggle to practice law on an equal footing with men, and that the profession struggles to recruit and retain Māori, Pacific and other ethnic minority lawyers? Returning to my earlier theme, we have made a lot of progress in enhancing gender diversity in the profession. We do and we should celebrate firsts and glass ceilings cracked or smashed. And yet, hiding in plain sight, we see this insidious discrimination against women continuing and flourishing. Now, returning to Ethel, could she see this coming? She cautioned more than 100 years ago. But here, she said, I sound a warning note. Let us see to it that we do not go to the other extreme, that our women do not become mere thinking machines, or worse even still, that overcultivation does not lose that individuality that every man and woman should prize above all else. The heart must be developed as well as the brain. I reckon the lesson we need to take from Ethel here is not to simply pursue diversity for its own sake, not to simply pursue a numerical statistical equivalence. that risks us losing something critical, the heart, to use Ethel's word, or the culture of who we are and who we want to be as lawyers. By over-cultivating the brain, Ethel warned we would lose our individuality. In today's language, she's speaking right into what we now talk about as diversity and inclusion. It's inclusivity that allows workplaces to grow fully realised lawyers, to leverage off people's differences, to innovate and to solve problems. It's through working for inclusivity that we can achieve equity of outcome, and not just diversity by the numbers for Māori, for women, for Pacifica. Once we delve deeper into diversity and start to think about inclusivity, the challenge becomes not how do we increase numbers of certain groups of lawyers, but rather how do we open ourselves up to think about things in a new way? How do we welcome new ideas that mean we can actually think differently together, rather than just treat new ideas as stuff to bat away or to firm up what we always thought? Working on inclusivity with its challenge to status quo that it brings raises another issue. Equality might feel unfair to those who are accustomed to enjoying the lion's share of privilege due to falling into what might seem like a default category. It might feel neutral to them. Those for whom status quo affords advantage and benefits assumed to be the product of merit can feel like the neutral position. The challenge I see is adapting to a new standard, an inclusive one, because inclusivity is the real prize of diversity. It's through inclusivity we create the culture of legal workplaces where we each bring our real and full selves to our jobs and where we have a profession that reflects the communities we serve. And I used to think that we'd gotten to the point where we could all agree diversity was important and that justification was no longer required. But I think that was wrong. So there's a ton of analysis that tells us that diversity is good for all sorts of reasons. But lately I hear people say, in a new phrase that I really don't like, that pursuing diversity is the right thing to do. Because my worry is if we start there, diversity is valuable because it's the right thing to do, we'll actually miss the critical aspects of why diversity is important. And if we don't really know why it's important, substantively, we'll focus on the wrong stuff. Because if we value diversity for its own sake, risks us making a buzz phrase that's effectively meaningless and for which we'd set up some measures or horror quotas so we can prove we are doing the right thing. And if all we do is blindly accept that diversity is a good idea, a worthy notion, and set about measuring how well we're doing, we'll risk only ever paying lip service to that concept. So I see there are lots of studies that show us that inclusive organisations are successful. One of them, from Deloitte, tells us that such organisations are 3 times more likely to be high performing, 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile, and 8 times more likely to deliver better outcomes. So the business case is there, not just on some moral imperative, but at the hard bottom line. Better problem solving, better creativity, better and increased delivery, better outcomes. That business case is just one component, and the broader point is that inclusive organisations and institutions ensure the legal profession as a whole can better interpret, apply and create the law to serve the diversity of Aotearoa's communities. So unless we actually harness the differences that diversity brings, unless we don't simply pick colleagues and employees for the different characteristics, gender, sexuality, gender diversity, ethnicity and so on, but actually welcome the different perspective that they can bring, different ways of doing things that diverse groups of people can bring, we will fail to shift the status quo. There's little point in counting up the quantitative ways in which we have diverse workforces if the cultural reality is, oh no, that's the way we've always done things. And that's what drives people and people's expectations about how to behave. And I think this is the big challenge for us as diversity and the drive for it becomes de rigueur. We must make sure that inclusion as part of diversity is actually what we focus on. And that's quite hard because that requires cultural change. As an organisation or professional culture change, that's what we really need to achieve. And as I've already mentioned, the shift will feel harder for those who benefit from the status quo. But imagine the feeling for those who do not if we can shift this culture. I worry that as lawyers we're trained actually against being able to embrace diversity. We're trained right from the start to follow precedent, principle, order, and the way things have always been done feature large in the way we are taught and in the way we work. So how do we modify the way we think about the scope and nature of law and train ourselves and our new lawyers to think a bit differently? Can we introduce a symptomology of diverse thinking into workplaces, into professional standards, into performance expectations? And what would that look like? Currently, we train for hierarchy and we enforce compliance and conformity that way. And this accords with the very nature of the common law, following precedent, conforming with authority, absorbing change in small increments. It's not really suitable for workplaces now and institutions that need to recognise different models of hierarchy and authority and different models of responsibility against and among members of the community. We need to build into the teaching of law critical thinking that embraces difference, along with making sure we teach the precedent and the disciplines of precedent and the common law tradition. So in our organisations, on mine and many of yours, I'm sure, we measure our diversity outcomes. How many women are in our senior tiers? What ethnic diversity do we have? And then we publish these results. Now this is the stuff that's easy to count, the number of women, Māori, Pacific, minority genders, people with disabilities, but actually it doesn't tell us anything, does it? It doesn't tell us anything about equity of outcome. Einstein is said to have given us the maxim, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And Peter Drucker, a management consultant guru, tells us what gets measured gets managed. So what should we do? Count or not count? Measure or not measure? Anyone here who has to contribute to their organisational annual performance reporting will understand the challenge of making meaningful measures that are easy to count. But we do need to work on this. We need to find meaningful goals that actually advance progress on inclusivity and equity of outcome and find ways to measure that. This, I reckon, will help us develop the heart that Ethel was referring to, the underpinning culture, the heart of our profession, that will deliver the true benefits of diverse workforces, leadership in a diverse profession. Rather than getting diverse numbers and then strangling that diversity into substantive uniformity with slightly different packaging, we have to develop the heart so that diversity can thrive. So now what? Nō reira, ara te kōrero. There is a saying, tongia te ururua, kia tupu whakaritorito te tupu o te harakeke. Set fire to the scrub so the flax plants can shoot forth young evergreen roots. There are parts of our legal institutions that I reckon we should burn down, metaphorically, of course, in order to let new ideas and new ways flourish. Let's not keep spending our energies demanding places in institutions that maintain the status quo, that refuse to share power, that continue to discriminate against women and Māori and Pacifica. There is good news here. From the Law Society survey that I mentioned, we know that 30% of lawyers and 40% of lawyers under 30 years old believe major change is required in our workplaces and in our culture. There's a large number of us who see the need for change. And in further good news, the Law Society's Culture Change Task Force has been working hard since the middle of last year on its strategy to support the creation and maintenance of diverse, healthy, safe, respectful and inclusive legal organisations. Their recommendations are on track to be announced next month. I thought I had jotted down, but you will have seen the Law Society's announcement yesterday that it will undertake a significant review of the Law Society and the legislative underpinning that helps it be the regulator. I haven't got to the bottom of what the announcement was because it just came out yesterday, but that also seems like very good news, something that we should all be working into. Because for my part, I've reached the conclusion that the traditional model of today's lawyer needs significant re-evaluation, not just about how we deliver our services, but about who we are and why we're here. And while I don't just promote a talk fest without action, dialogue to continue uncovering uncomfortable truths about ourselves as a profession is critical to support sustained cultural change. Otherwise, we risk keep trying to place in races that we don't want to run in, to measure ourselves against the wrong things. And it risks in another decade or two, or maybe 3, I'll be echoing Dame Sylvia's dismayed comment in last year's Human Rights Commission video that they released for Suffrage Day, her comment when she said, "I can't believe we're still talking about discrimination against women." So here's what I think, and disclaimer, this is not government policy. These are my own views, but they are the basis of who I am as a person, a lawyer, and a leader in our profession. So the first thing I say is that lawyers need to lose any ego we have about having all the answers. Now, as you've heard, I've always worked in in-house legal teams for government. When I was first at the Ministry of Fisheries, I was early warned that a policy advisor was a bush lawyer. What an insult. And that I should look out for his from the hip and risky gung-ho approach to the law. Sure enough, he did have that approach to the law. I would often say the law was but a guide. But actually, taught me really early that the much maligned bush lawyer is really valuable to the lawyer. They often know the policy and the purpose behind legislation. They frequently can point out the pitfalls or how things have been done before for good or for bad. They have a wealth of knowledge that the lawyer can mine to get up to speed with the business, to make connections, to add value. It was there that I learned the strength of working with others, listening to other perspectives in multidisciplinary teams, teams that allow for the integration of specialist knowledge sets in multiple perspectives to deliver a solution or a set of options for decision makers. Collaboration, another much maligned concept, is not about everybody talking endlessly about everything. If you think that's what collaboration is, you are doing it wrong. So the second thing I think we need to do is rethink the product that lawyers are peddling. The legal opinion has a lot to answer for, in my view. There's this long-held belief that what you get from a lawyer is a long, well-articulated and reasoned, dispassionate assessment of what the law says the answer is. The time is long past when lawyers could sit in isolation in their offices and divine the one true answer based on what the law means in a certain situation. Because I reckon if that's how we think about ourselves as lawyers, or if that's what our clients think about us, we'll be overtaken by the robots very soon. And I think we'd deserve to be. But if we do what Ethel told us to do all those years ago and develop our heart as well as our brain, if we make sure we maintain our individuality and our humanity, we can build the lawyer that Ethel was imagining all those years ago. We can outperform artificial intelligence lawyering by having well-developed humanity at the centre of our professional culture. So we'll move away from, and we are, the £800 gorilla model of lawyering, where value is measured by hourly billing, quantity of work delivered, a closed shop of legal talk which only other lawyers can understand, to a model where the advice offered is innovative and solution-focused and the result of a collaborative, multidisciplinary set of work processes. The traditional law firm model is changing too, but the traditional model where the prize is to make partner, to draw profits from the firm, doesn't sit well with a truly collaborative and innovative model. Time-based billing to clients remains the firm's main mode of measuring value, although, as I say, this is changing. But measuring 6-minute units of time disincentivises innovation, downgrades those non-billable but critical functions, research, productivity, culture development. We're starting to see this here in Aotearoa, a slow change in the law firm offering. The highly flexible law firm which uses different billing arrangements, secondments and project-based offerings of lawyers, using online self-help models, providing flexible workforces. And it's no surprise to me that these are the workplaces that suit women and a more ethnically diverse workforce. In 2019, nearly 2/3 of lawyers working in-house are women. So the in-house model of lawyering, where corporates and others, government departments for example, they employ lawyers in order to make sure they've got access in a flexible way to focused legal advice from lawyers who understand the business, who understand its risks and opportunities, and see themselves as part of a broader team. Those organisations value those lawyers a bit differently. What this model allows is a focus on the client and the business needs rather than hours worked and billing targets. The lawyers' value is what they bring to the table, to the solutions and the options. This is a culture change and it requires a lot of our leadership. How can we achieve change at the high echelons, those that continue to be associated with power and influence in the profession? Now, the criteria for conferring the rank of Queen's Counsel, these are our senior lawyers, a quality mark of excellence. Those criteria have been based around a senior lawyer who is recognised for a rather hard to identify overarching standard of excellence, primarily as litigators. We've tended to shy away from entirely unpacking what's contained by excellence, although there are some guidelines that do some of that. This year, the Attorney-General and the Chief Justice consulted and then changed the criteria for appointment as Queen's Counsel by adding a criterion that was a proven commitment to advancing access to justice. That's what they said they would also be looking for in applicants to take silk. Excuse me. It's too soon to say what result such a change will have to the pool of senior lawyers who make the coveted rank, either this year or in future years, but it hasn't gone without comment. One response to the proposed new criterion noting, well, that might suggest that the QC rank can be achieved through good works. This would reduce the importance of the overarching requirement for excellence. What is more important, excellence in leadership as an advocate or good works? Now, that was just one comment, and I don't want to overreact. I did, probably, already. But my point in raising it is that if we unconsciously or otherwise hang on to the way we view concepts or values so tight that the status quo can't change, we're going to waste a lot of time working on the wrong things to achieve cultural change. In this particular example, is it so hard to hold both things together? To say that the overarching requirement for excellence is multifaceted? So that so-called good works, itself a disparaging way to describe the concept, and excellence are not seen as binary opposites. Until we unearth these difficult questions buried deep in our culture and, I think it'll have to be, courageously face them, we won't be able to undo the hierarchies, the power shops, the carefully guarded influential roles that truly hold inclusivity back. Ultimately, I think we need to redefine the values of the profession and who we serve. What does it mean to be a lawyer? It can't just be that we provide quality service to a series of clients who seek us out. Our profession has a higher purpose, ensuring access to justice, maintaining the quality of justice and its relevance to the communities, and upholding the rule of law. Law is important because it makes society work. It makes democratic and free society work. So lawyering can't just be about us as lawyers, it must be about the service that we give to society, to justice, to the bedrock rule of law. And we can only do these things if our numbers reflect and include the diversity of the communities we represent. We lawyers occupy an extremely privileged place in society, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. And with that comes responsibility for each other, for our communities, and for the law itself. So what if we move to hold ourselves to values that explicitly support that ambition? Respect for each other as people, not based on hierarchy of role, the impact on the wider profession of our conduct, not just our immediate client, not even just ourselves. How can we hold each other to a higher standard that we might claim for ourselves? What then might we say about the fit and proper person to whom entrance to our profession is reserved, and how will we measure that? There are already critical junctions in legal careers that we can use as opportunities to shape both current and future lawyers. University, of course, ethics courses at university, other learning opportunities at universities, the professional courses by which those newly minted lawyers are launched into practice, admissions ceremonies, admissions processes, stepping up courses for barristers, appointment of QCs, appointments to the judiciary. We can and should use these junctions in a lawyer's career to set expectations and to remind us of what a fit and proper person is and who lawyers serve at all stages of their career. Leaders set the tone, listening and speaking out about these issues, role modelling the behaviours we want, and taking action when required, all go to moving culture and resetting what is acceptable. New and younger lawyers will no longer tolerate the workplaces that some of our profession have grown up in, and nor should they. You might have noticed earlier that I greeted my family members, my niece and my nephew who are law students who are here today, Sam and Mia. Don't tolerate it. There are other young people in this room. If you see that behaviour, do not tolerate it. If you suffer it, don't put up with it. You don't have to. Speak to someone else about it. But alone, this won't be enough. The regulatory model has to change too. One of the findings of Dame Sylvia's working group report is that the Law Society wasn't viewed as the place and wasn't ready for complaints about lawyers in relation to harassment or bullying behaviour in workplaces. We need to match culture change leadership with the firm hand of the Law Society as regulator to set the baseline and to enforce it. Together, we will deliver real and sustainable change. And congratulations, of course, to the Law Society for accepting the working group's recommendations on the changes that are needed. It's another opportunity for culture reset to drive our profession forward in redefining the personal and professional standards that we should hold ourselves to, so that sexual harassment, bullying, discrimination, other unacceptable behaviour is simply not tolerated, so that people who see it or suffer it know what to do, with processes that support them to speak out. The framework for how those expectations are delivered in workplaces is also a role for the regulator. Who in legal workplaces is responsible for setting the expectations, and how can we measure that? What about an audited compliance framework around certain known practices that we know about and we need to unearth? For example, a requirement that workplaces have clear and easy to follow policies and practices on behaviour, how to raise concerns for resolution either inside or outside of the workplace, a behaviour champion, or more than one, in every senior team, a prohibition on confidentiality agreements that prevent complainants from taking external legal or other regulatory action, clear policies on alcohol in the legal work environment. It's not surprising that there is a significant intersection here with another thing that we often talk about as lawyers, mental health and well-being. We work in fast-paced and stressful environments, often with distressing content, and positive workplace cultures can either enhance or degrade our mental well-being. Actually, I found Ethel here early too. One of the things that she said was that I believe if students should give themselves a more liberal allowance of resting time, they would do better work. The reset tools here are actually quite simple, and you and we are all talking about them: encouraging well-being, having policies and access to mental health services, normalising flexible and part-time work, and not creating hidden or real or not hidden barriers to advancement where those working styles are used. Breastfeeding-friendly workplaces, gender-neutral and accessible toilets. These aren't new ideas, but consciousness is required to bring all aspects of the workplace together so that we can think about positive culture and inclusivity together. Everyone can bring their whole selves to work, do their best and maintain their well-being. I mentioned earlier that legislative change was also required for Ethel to practice law. And it's interesting to observe the fashion at work here of legislative reform leading a burst of social change. I'm not the first person to say this, obviously, but the Electoral Act in 1893 allowed women to vote. Women Practitioners Act, we've just heard, allowed Ethel to practice. Women's Parliamentary Rights Act that allowed women to stand for Parliament, through the equal pay legislation of the 60s and 70s, which is getting a real workout now, many decades later. Domestic Violence Act, the recent Family Violence Act, to enactments permitting civil unions leading to marriage equality. And what preceded all of those legislative changes was often significant protest action to pave the way. So I reckon that people in leadership positions need to make space for those other voices, including rebel voices, to speak, and to speak without fear and to take action on issues when they are raised without being seen to take that action. It's really difficult for minority voices to speak with confidence when leaders don't listen or aren't seen to be listening, when leaders are seen to promote and revere those who don't honour diversity or respect the humanity of others. So I also say we need to listen to rebels, and I think Ethel would agree. After all, she quoted Sarah Grand's similar sentiment about rebels to her graduating class. To the graduating class, Ethel said, "It is the rebels who, quoting Sarah Grand, it is the rebels who extend the boundary of right little by little, narrowing the confines of wrong and crowding it out of existence." And when I was preparing for the speech, I went and found the fuller quote, and I thought it was worth delivering the full quote today. In Sarah Grand's 1893 feminist novel, The Heavenly Twins, the heroine, Evandine, is speaking to her aunt about why she refuses to get married. "You mean submit?" Evandine answered, and she shook her head. "No, that word is of no use to me. My word is rebel. It seems to me that those who dare to rebel in every age are they who make life possible, for whom temperament compels them to submit. It is rebels who extend the boundary of right little by little, narrowing the confines of wrong and crowding it out of existence." In the novel, she then flounces from her aunt's drawing room. As a leader of an organisation and in this profession, I believe that people who speak into these difficult issues should be treasured. For leaders to be a bit uncomfortable, not to know what the answers are and to be open about that, to welcome constructive disagreement and criticism, allows those same leaders to build positive workplaces and a working culture in which diversity and its indispensable sidekick, inclusion, can flourish. So this is my call to action then. We are at a culture reset moment for the profession, and let's not waste the opportunity. Those of us in privileged positions need to open our eyes to what's happening around us and use our positions to call for change, to insist on cultural change. I hope Dame Sylvia was right to say we are at a watershed moment, because change must come now. And progress won't be easy, and courageous dialogue will need to be had all around the motu, supported by leaders in the profession, until we can talk into these cultural issues honestly and build into our educative and regulatory frameworks the processes to help us really shift the dial. It didn't surprise me, and it probably won't surprise you to find that I found Ethel Benjamin here well ahead of me. While in the quote I'm going to end on, she was talking about women's efforts to become lawyers, I find the sentiment today speaking to all of us, men and women, about the path ahead. Do not expect to encounter no obstacles on the road to success, and when you find them blocking progress, do not get disheartened, but but cheerfully set to work to overcome them one by one. The man or woman with indomitable will, with unswerving purpose, with a courage which never falters, with a concentration that directs all forces to one goal, that man or woman, I say, with these qualities will sooner or later achieve success in whatever sphere of life he or she may be placed. Circumstances may do much to retard our progress, but sooner or later they must yield to the man or woman with a will of iron. Nō reira, tēnā taku mihi atu ki a koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to the address today. I'm Lizzie Rutherford, Deputy Convener of the Otago Women Lawyers Society. On behalf of OWLS, it is my absolute pleasure to thank you, Una, for being our speaker today. I'd also like to acknowledge the members of your team at Crown Law, in particular Elizabeth Underhill, who was so helpful ahead of your visit to Dunedin. It has been a real privilege to hear such a thoughtful and incredibly relevant address. It was no surprise to me that you chose the topic that you did. We are very lucky to have a Solicitor-General who is open about the need for a different kind of profession, one that values inclusivity, collaboration, and diversity of thinking. The part of your address today that particularly struck me was your question of what does it mean to be a lawyer? When I started in the profession in 2010, which is not that long ago, but many lifetimes after Ethel, that did mean really long hours, ultra-competitive and conservative workplaces, a love of hierarchy and the status quo, and unfortunately, yes, discrimination and harassment. I can't list all the ways that first job shaped me, but I can say that I started to dream in 6-minute units. And being different in any way in that environment was not an asset, but a liability. So I really welcome and celebrate what you have said today, that with this opportunity to seriously change the culture of the profession, we need to redefine what it means to be a lawyer. And as you have said, we need to work on our hearts as much as our brains. And on that work, I want to thank you for what you have said about leadership and privilege. With so many influential people in this room, you've given a very timely reminder that great leaders not only make space for minority voices, but they take action themselves. Tēnā koe, Una, thank you again. To show our appreciation and to add to your new collection of OWLS items, and as is OWLS tradition, we would like to present you with a special handcrafted brooch made by Dunedin jeweller Tony Williams.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Una. Thank you. I'd now like to welcome Miriam Dean QC to speak on behalf of the Law Foundation.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I am really delighted to be here today to represent the trustees of the New Zealand Law Foundation for this annual Ethel Benjamin commemorative address, and I do thank the Solicitor-General Una Jagose, Queen's Counsel, for her thought-provoking words. Una, you are a true trailblazer, just as Ethel Benjamin was, and I'm sure if Ethel was here today, she would say you are to be treasured for calling out our conduct and culture issues. The New Zealand Law Foundation is proud to have funded this annual address from its very beginning, and the trustees do want to pay tribute to the Otago Women Lawyers Society. You are to be congratulated for the professionalism with which you organise this event each year, making it now a nationally recognised event of such significance, just looking at the numbers you have here today. It is because this event has become such a key part of our legal calendar each year that we, the Law Foundation, are very keen it continues. As many of you may know, however, we are going into recess in the middle of next year to allow our funding base to rebuild so that in time we can support a new generation of leaders and thinkers in legal research. Our last funding round, regrettably, will be July 2020. However, the trustees have decided to maintain a presence as best as we can during our recess, and we are going to continue to support 3 key initiatives which we believe are important to the profession so our legacy can continue in the interim. So I am really delighted to announce today that we have committed to fund this annual address for the next 10 years to ensure this excellent event continues. This year is the 23rd. This year is the 23rd address. We, the trustees, have already put aside, so you can be safe, Otago Women Lawyers Association, that the money is there. We've already set aside the funds to ensure it can keep going at least until the 34th annual address, by which time we hope to be relaunched and back in business. Hand in hand with this, we have also decided to continue to offer the annual New Zealand Law Foundation Ethel Benjamin Scholarship for Women. Established on the centenary of her admission, as many of you again will know, the scholarship is worth up to $50,000 a year. To date, it has assisted 43 women to study at some of the most prestigious universities in the world. So we are committed to ensure both this address and the scholarship continue throughout our recess. The third initiative, I have to say, not exclusive to women, but I do think as a woman 2 out of 3 is very good, is the Cleary Memorial Prize, the profession's prize for future promise, which has been awarded most years for the past 50 years. We intend to hand back the administration of the prize to the New Zealand Law Society, but we, the foundation, will continue to fund it. Finally, the trustees did want me here today to acknowledge the important 150th anniversaries this year of both the New Zealand Law Society and the University of Otago. We have always particularly had a very close relationship with your university, and indeed it's been the biggest recipient of our funding, receiving nearly $9 million in the past 25 years to support some fantastic, innovative and important legal research. We do wish the university well in its 150th year and acknowledge it was the institution that helped Ethel and many other leading women, such as Una, to achieve their career goals and take their place rightly as leaders in our society. We have an equally close relationship with the Law Society. It was the Law Society which created the Law Foundation, and we're delighted to be able to collaborate and celebrate together today, Tiana, both this event and your 150th anniversary. Once again, as funder, I do congratulate OWLS on another successful event and the Solicitor-General on your address. We women have come a long way since Ethel Benjamin's day, although as Una's address makes clear, we still have a long way to go. But if I may conclude on a personal and perhaps positive note, a visit to Chicago's wonderful history museum last week reminded me we have definitely made progress. I was really taken by an exhibit of what were called Hooverettes. These were 1950s white organdy, ruffle-trimmed dresses described as adorably dainty and inspiration for women to do housework cheerfully. Give me our legal garb, even those dreaded horsehair wigs many of us will don shortly, over Hooverettes any day, as a reminder of just how far we have come. Ngā mihi.
Thank you, Miriam, for those kind words. And a huge thank you to the Law Foundation for ensuring the future of the Ethel Benjamin Address. We are so grateful for the many, many years of support we have received from the Law Foundation, and it's a great privilege to have that continued support. And as you can see from this packed room, the address always brings people together, so we are really looking forward to doing it again. As well as the Law Foundation, I'd like to thank our convener, Karen, for her tireless work on pulling this event and many others together. And also a big thank you to the OWLS Committee for being a great bunch of women who work hard for their community. Finally, I'd also like to thank our sponsors for their support over the years. In particular, the University of Otago Faculty of Law and the Williams Trust. And thank you to the Art Gallery for hosting us, Professor Peart for the beautiful flowers, Sai from Impressions Audio and Inspired Pantry, whose catering we will enjoy in just a moment. Before we conclude the event, I'd like to come back to Ethel Benjamin. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the photo that was taken at the opening of the Dunedin High Court in 1902. It is a crowd of men, but at the front, smack bang in the middle, standing next to the Premier of Aotearoa, there is one woman, Ethel. And here we are now. There is a lesson in that, which Una has touched on in the address. Yes, make the most of every opportunity, but step back from time to time and let that one person who might be different from you step forward. That now concludes the 23rd Annual Law Foundation Ethel Benjamin Address. Thank you all so much for coming, and please join us for refreshments. Thank you.